General Forlax stood on the bridge of his command ship, arms crossed behind his back, staring down at the green and blue planet below. To him, it was nothing more than another insignificant rock, a minor obstacle in the expansion of the Zarketh Empire. The humans, if they could even be called that, were barely a footnote in the grand history of galactic conquest. This would be easy, a routine invasion. General, his tactical officer, Zalver, spoke in the cold, calculated tone of a seasoned warrior. Scanners indicate primitive resistance. Energy readings suggest outdated ballistic weaponry. No orbital defenses of note. Forlax grunted, a deep rumble of satisfaction. Typical. Another underdeveloped species, thinking they can hold their ground. He turned, his imposing crimson armor gleaming under the command room's pale blue lights. Deploy the shock troops. Minimal force. Let's see if they can even last an hour. As the invasion force descended through the atmosphere, Forlax allowed himself a rare smirk. He had crushed civilization-spanning star systems, dismantled entire fleets with a single command. This would be nothing more than an amusing warm-up. Then, the first explosion rocked the command ship. Forlax stumbled slightly, catching himself with a clawed hand against the console. What in the abyss was that? Zalver frantically tapped at the controls, his mandibles clicking in confusion. General, the humans, they... Another explosion. Then another. The fleet's sleek, impenetrable drop ships began plummeting in flames, lighting up the sky like celestial fireflies. Forlax snarled. Are they using planetary artillery? No, sir. Zalver's tone wavered. It appears they are using, rockets. Shoulder-mounted. Heat-seeking. Forlax blinked. You mean to tell me, he said slowly, that our state-of-the-art, plasma-shielded warships are being taken down by handheld weapons? Zalver hesitated. Yes, General. Forlax exhaled sharply. Pathetic. Below, the battlefield was anything but. The human soldiers had spread out in unpredictable patterns, using ruined buildings, natural terrain, and what appeared to be sheer audacity to their advantage. The Zarketh shock troopers, towering biometallic warriors bred for war, charged in organized formations, only to be met with tripwires, remote explosives, and what Forlax could only describe as insane combat strategies. One of the comm channels buzzed. General Forlax, we need reinforcements. These creatures, they don't fight like any species we've encountered. Forlax narrowed his eyes. Explain. There was a pause. The comm line crackled. Then, sir, they bite. Forlax frowned. They what? They bite, sir. One of them jumped on Sergeant Karan's back and started screaming. Something about a Tuesday, and then it bit him with its mouth. Forlax stared at the transmission, momentarily at a loss for words. Is Sergeant Karan alive? A short pause. No, sir. It also had a knife. Forlax rubbed his temples. This was not how conquests were supposed to go. He pulled up a tactical view of the battlefield, watching in increasing frustration as his forces were picked apart not by superior firepower, not by overwhelming numbers, but by sheer unpredictability. One squad of human soldiers had built a makeshift barricade out of their own wrecked vehicles, using them as cover to launch what seemed to be. Was that a Molotov cocktail? A primitive incendiary weapon used by pre-spacefaring civilizations? And yet it was working. Another comm message came through, this one from Captain Relvier, one of Forlax's most reliable officers. His voice was unusually tense. General, we need immediate extraction. Forlax clenched his jaw. You were given the best soldiers in the fleet, Captain. I expect results, not cowardice. With all due respect, sir, Relvier's voice was laced with something Forlax had never heard from him before. Unease. These creatures are not fighting by any established military doctrine. They improvise. They adapt. A sudden burst of static, then a distant, panicked shout. Asterisk, why is it playing music? Why is it, asterisk? The transmission cut out. Forlax inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. Zalver? Yes, General? Have we identified their leader? Yes, sir. Colonel Jack Reynolds. A human military strategist? Forlax nodded. At last, some sense in this madness. Then I will deal with him personally. Minutes later, Forlac descended onto the battlefield in a reinforced war mech, striding through fire and chaos toward the human front lines. He would crush this so-called leader, scatter their forces, and restore order to what should have been a simple planetary conquest. Then he saw the human commander. Colonel Jack Reynolds was leaning against a battered tank, wearing a tattered uniform and an easy grin, sipping from a metal flask as if he had all the time in the world. When he saw Forlac, he lifted the flask in a mock toast. Ah, finally, the big guy. Forlac stepped forward, looming over the human. You are Colonel Reynolds. Reynolds took another sip. In the flesh, Forlac's mechanical limbs hissed as he adjusted his stance. Surrender now, human, and I will spare your species unnecessary suffering. Reynolds wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. That's real generous of you. But, see, he gestured vaguely behind him, where another Zarketh warship exploded in the sky. I don't think we're the ones who need saving. Forlac's expression darkened. You are vastly outnumbered. Your technology is primitive. Your survival is a statistical anomaly. Reynolds shrugged. You ever hear the term, sore loser? Before Forlac could respond, a sudden beeping filled his helmet. An alert from his war mech. A red light flashed. He barely had time to register the warning before the mech's legs detonated, sending him crashing to the ground. As Forlac groaned, struggling to move, Reynolds crouched beside him, shaking his head with an almost sympathetic expression. You aliens always make the same mistake. Forlac glared up at him. And what mistake is that? Reynolds smirked, thinking we fight fair. And then he stood, dusted himself off, and walked away as the battlefield burned. General Forlac sat in his command chamber, fists clenched against the cold metal table. His war mech was still being repaired, and his pride? That would take far longer to fix. Across from him, Zelver hesitated before speaking, his mandibles twitching nervously. General, the humans have tactics? Forlac's eyes narrowed. So do we. Yes, sir. But there's work. The general exhaled slowly. This was not the first time his officer had delivered bad news today. His invasion force had been expecting an easy conquest, land secure, dominate. Instead, they were fighting an enemy that refused to play by the rules of war. If anything, the humans were acting as if they enjoyed chaos. He leaned forward. Tell me everything. Zalver hesitated again, as if trying to find a way to soften the impact of his next words. They improvise. Forlac frowned. Elaborate? Zalver tapped at the holographic interface, pulling up battlefield footage. Watch. The first clip showed a squad of Zarketh soldiers advancing on a seemingly abandoned human outpost. As they approached, a lone human popped out from cover, waving his arms frantically. Asterisk, hey? Ugly! Asterisk, the soldier shouted. Asterisk, I bet your mom lays eggs in a swamp. Asterisk. The Zarketh hesitated. This was not standard battlefield behavior. Before they could react, the human threw something at them, a small metal object. The squad instinctively dived for cover, expecting a grenade. But the object just landed. It didn't explode. It beeped. Then it began playing music. Forlac tilted his head as the sound of a human marching band blared through the battlefield, confusing the Zarketh long enough for hidden human snipers to take them out one by one. The footage ended. Zalver cleared his throat. They call it psychological warfare. Forlac growled. That was not warfare. That was nonsense. Zalver pulled up the next clip. This one showed a heavily fortified Zarketh position. Plasma cannons, shield barriers, completely impenetrable. Yet the humans broke through. How? They snuck in wearing Zarketh armor. Hastily repainted, slightly oversized, and incredibly unconvincing, but it worked. The human infiltrators walked right past the guards, one of them even saluting a superior officer. Then, at the perfect moment, they detonated hidden explosives, sending Zarketh reinforcements scattering. Forlac's jaw tightened. Impossible. We would have recognized them. Zalver zoomed in on the footage, pointing to the lead infiltrator's disguise. The armor plating had asterisk, definitely not a human asterisk, crudely written on the chest in marker. Silence filled the room. Forlack inhaled sharply. Next, the third clip showed something even stranger. A small human unit was pinned down behind cover, outnumbered. They had no viable escape routes. Then, they did something incomprehensible. They made animal noises. The Zarketh troops hesitated. Then, from the jungle behind them, something enormous roared, the kind of roar that belonged to a beast that should not exist. Something big. Something hungry. The Zarketh panicked. Their ranks broke. They fled. There was no beast. It had been a recording. Forlack's eye twitched. Zalver spoke cautiously. General, they exploit fear. They exploit expectation. They fight unpredictably. He hesitated. They fight to win. Not with honor, not with tradition, but by any means necessary. Forlack leaned back, exhaling slowly. This changes nothing, he muttered. Zalver exchanged glances with the other officers. Sir, we should consider. No, Forlack's tone was sharp, absolute. We are the Zarketh Empire. We do not retreat from primitive species with cardboard disguises and noise machines. We adapt. We overpower. He stood, his presence towering over the room. They think chaos is their weapon? Fine. We will drown them in it. Zalver hesitated, then nodded. Yes, General. The order was given. If the humans wanted chaos, they would receive it. Zarketh forces abandoned traditional formations, embracing unpredictability. They launched rapid strikes instead of overwhelming force. They used deception, feints, anything to match human tactics. For a brief moment, it worked. Human forces, so used to being the ones surprising their enemies, now found themselves reacting instead. Then something changed. At first, it seemed like a fluke. A single Zarketh squad disappeared without explanation. Then another. Then an entire battalion. No distress calls. No wreckage. Just gone. Forlack demanded answers. Scouts were sent out. They found nothing. Until one survivor returned. Shaking, battered, wide-eyed, the Zarketh warrior collapsed before his general. Forlack loomed over him. Report. The soldier swallowed. He took a deep breath. Sir, they adapted back. Forlack stiffened. They let us change tactics. Then they changed again. The soldier shuddered. They weren't even armed, sir. They fought with their bare hands. His eyes darted around, paranoid, as if the humans might be listening. They enjoyed it. Forlack's stomach turned. This was something else. He had expected a battle. He had not expected an enemy that refused to be understood. Zalver took a cautious step forward. General, I think we may have underestimated them. Forlack said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, he turned to the bridge, his voice colder than ever. Prepare an emergency war council. He could admit it now. This was no ordinary conquest. This was survival. The war council chamber was eerily silent. General Forlack stood at the head of the table, his claws digging into the metal surface. Across from him, his officers exchanged uneasy glances, their exoskeletal plates shifting in discomfort. For the first time in his long and decorated military career, Forlack was unsure of his next move. Zalver broke the silence. General, we must discuss them. Forlack's crimson eyes flickered. He didn't need to ask who they were. The humans. The unrelenting, unpredictable, absolutely infuriating humans. Their forces should have crumbled by now, Captain Relvier added, his mandibles clicking with irritation. They are outgunned, outnumbered. Their technology is centuries behind ours. And yet, Forlack growled, we are the ones holding emergency war councils. Silence again. Zalver hesitated before speaking. It's not just their tactics, General. It's something deeper. He activated the holoscreen, displaying footage from the battlefield. The first clip showed a human soldier, barely standing, his uniform torn, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead. He was surrounded, 7 Zarketh warriors advancing on him, their plasma rifles raised. He should have surrendered. Any logical being would have. Instead, the human grinned, wiped the blood from his brow, and said, you guys are screwed, Then he pulled the pin on a grenade and charged them. The footage cut out in static. A heavy pause hung in the air. "What was that?" one of the officers muttered. Zalver exhaled. "That was what they call a last stand." Forlak's jaw tightened. "Show me more." The next clip played. It was security footage from a captured human encampment. Zarketh guards patrolled lazily, believing the battle was already won. The prisoners, battered and restrained, sat in silence, until one of them started singing a low, defiant melody. At first, just one voice. Then another joined, and another. Within moments, the entire group was singing in unison, their voices echoing through the metal walls. One of the guards turned, mandibles twitching in confusion. "What are they doing?" Another guard shifted uneasily. It appears to be a battle song. They are prisoners. What battle do they think they are still fighting? No one had an answer. The footage ended. Relvier let out a slow breath. They don't know when to stop. Forlak shook his head. "No," he corrected. "They refused to stop." His claws drummed against the table. He had fought warriors, strategists, even fanatics. But this was something else entirely. These humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting as if they enjoyed the struggle, as if the mere act of resisting was a victory in itself. Zalver hesitated, then spoke in a careful tone. "General, we received a direct message from the human commander." Forlak's eyes narrowed. "Reynolds?" Zalver nodded. "Play it." The holoscreen flickered, revealing Colonel Jack Reynolds, dirty, bruised, but still wearing that infuriating smirk. He took a sip from his ever-present flask before looking into the camera. "Hey there, General Tentacle Face," Reynolds greeted casually. "Hope you're enjoying your stay on our little death trap of a planet." Forlak's mandibles twitched. "Listen," Reynolds continued, leaning forward. "I get it. You guys are used to rolling over people. Show up, blast a few cities, make some scary speeches, and boom, instant empire expansion. But see, here's the thing." He gestured vaguely behind him, where another Zarketh dropship exploded in the distance. "We don't do surrender." Reynolds leaned closer, his voice lowering slightly. "You could burn our cities. You could take our land. Hell, you could kill all of us. But you'll never win, because for every one of us that falls, 10 more will pick up a gun. Or a rock. Or, I don't know, a kitchen knife." He chuckled. "I saw a guy yesterday take out one of your big bio-soldiers with a shovel." Forlak's eye twitched. Reynolds took another sip. "You don't get it, do you? You came here thinking you'd be fighting soldiers. But you're fighting humans, and humans?" He grinned. "We don't fight because we have to. We fight because it's fun." The screen cut to black. The silence that followed was suffocating. Zalver shifted uneasily. "General, what do we do?" Forlak stared at the dead screen, his mind racing. He had never encountered an enemy like this. These weren't warriors bound by duty, nor were they mindless zealots willing to die for a cause. They were something worse. They were relentless. Slowly, he rose to his full height. "We end this," he declared. Zalver straightened. "Sir?" Forlak's gaze burned with cold determination. "We have two choices. Continue this war until we are buried beneath their stubborn corpses, or find another way." Relvier hesitated. "You mean surrender?" Forlak let out a low, bitter chuckle. "No, I mean negotiate." For the first time since the battle began, he saw the path to victory, not through annihilation, not through force, but through understanding. If humans refused to break, then perhaps the smartest move was to stop trying. The battlefield was silent, too silent. General Forlak stood at the front of his command deck, eyes locked on the scorched landscape below. Smoke curled lazily from ruined vehicles, the wreckage of both Zarketh and human machines strewn across the war-torn plains. The final battle was upon them. Behind him, Zalver shifted uneasily. "General, the humans have not retreated." Forlak exhaled slowly. Of course they hadn't. He had offered them a chance, negotiations, peace, an end to this madness. Reynolds had responded with a simple message. You first. The humans would never surrender. That much was clear. But today, neither would the Zarketh. One final engagement would decide everything. Across the valley, the human forces stood in formation. Their weapons were mismatched, some scavenged from fallen Zarketh soldiers, others nothing more than repurposed farming tools. And yet they stood tall. They grinned. Some even laughed, as if this was just another ridiculous game they had chosen to play. Forlac clenched his fists. Begin the assault. The sky darkened as Zarketh warships descended, weapons primed. On the ground, their infantry surged forward, a tidal wave of disciplined precision. Plasma fire illuminated the battlefield in pulses of blue and green. And then chaos. The humans charged. Not in formation, not with strategy, just raw, reckless momentum. One soldier sprinted ahead, screaming Leroy Jenkins. At the top of his lungs before vanishing in an explosion. Another hurled a grenade, only to realize too late that it was actually a rock. It hit a Zarketh soldier in the face, knocking him unconscious. A squad of humans appeared out of nowhere, riding what looked like motorcycles with rocket launchers duct-taped to the sides. One of them threw something. Forlac braced for an explosion. It was a sandwich. The Zarketh who caught it hesitated, staring at the strange human food in confusion. Then the real attacks began. Snipers took out key officers. Engineers hijacked enemy mechs. One particularly unhinged human charged a heavily armed Zarketh trooper with nothing but a shovel and somehow won. Forlac watched in stunned silence. What is wrong with them? Zulver, dodging a stray explosion, muttered, "They enjoy this, sir." The battle raged on, neither side gaining a clear advantage. The humans refused to break, but the Zarketh were still the superior force. It should have been a slow, grinding victory for Forlac's troops. And then it happened. From the sky, a single human dropship descended, burning, barely holding together, spinning wildly out of control. The pilot was screaming something over the open comms. I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Forlac's eyes widened. No. The dropship crashed directly into the Zarketh command post. A shockwave tore through the battlefield. The explosion sent debris flying in all directions. When the dust settled, the Zarketh high command was gone. Silence. For the first time in the war, the Zarketh forces hesitated. The humans did not. With a single, earth-shaking roar, they surged forward, pressing their advantage. The disciplined ranks of the Zarketh crumbled. Even the most hardened soldiers faltered. Forlac could only watch. This was no ordinary war. This was a force of nature. Zalver spoke softly. "General, we have lost." Forlac turned to face him. Then, he did something no Zarketh had ever done before. He laughed. A deep, bitter, almost amused sound. Zalver blinked. "Sir?" Forlac shook his head, exhaling. "These creatures, they are insane. They are unstoppable." He looked back at the battlefield, at the humans who were now celebrating by blasting strange, rhythmic music from salvaged Zarketh speakers. Reynolds was there, grinning like a lunatic, toasting with a flask, as if he hadn't just witnessed his own men crash a burning spaceship into a military base on purpose. Forlac sighed. "Order the retreat." Zalver hesitated. "Sir?" Forlac turned, his gaze firm. "We cannot defeat them. Not because of their weapons. Not because of their numbers. But because they refuse to lose." He exhaled again, watching as the Zarketh forces scrambled to fall back. The war was over. And somehow, despite all logic, all strategy, all military doctrine, the humans had won. The war was over. The once mighty Zarketh invasion fleet, reduced and humiliated, limped away from the battlefield, their engines sputtering as they withdrew into the cold void of space. But for General Forlac, the battle still raged inside his own mind. He sat alone in his war chamber, staring at the holographic replay of the final engagement. The humans had done the impossible. No, not impossible. Illogical, that was the only word for it. A war was supposed to have rules, structure, predictable outcomes. Yet the humans had defied them all. Their strategy wasn't strategy at all. It was madness wrapped in sheer, reckless determination. It made no sense. And yet it had worked. Zalver entered cautiously, his mandibles twitching. "General." The War Council expects your report. Forlac exhaled. Tell me something, Zalver. What do you make of these humans? Zalver hesitated. I think they are unlike any species we have ever encountered. That much is obvious. I mean, Zalver continued, they don't just fight, they live for the fight. They don't fear destruction the way we do. They don't conquer the way we do. He paused. They turn war into a game. Forlac's jaw tightened. They should not have won, Zalver admitted. We were stronger. We were smarter. He glanced at the holoscreen, where the last moments of the battle played on loop. The human dropship crashing into their command post in what could only be described as a suicidal victory stunt. Zalver sighed. But maybe that's why they did win. Forlac leaned back, considering the thought. He had spent his entire career mastering warfare, studying history, refining tactics, anticipating enemies before they even knew their own weaknesses. And yet, against the humans, none of it had mattered, because the humans had no pattern, no logic, no fear. Forlac's claws tapped rhythmically against the table. There will be a problem? Zalver nodded. Yes, General. No, Forlac corrected. I mean for the galaxy. Zalver frowned. Sir? Forlac gestured to the screen, where footage of human soldiers celebrating filled the display. Today, they fought us, but tomorrow? He exhaled sharply. Tomorrow, they may face something worse. Zalver hesitated. You think they're dangerous? Forlac let out a bitter chuckle. They're already dangerous. But what happens when something stronger than us decides to challenge them? He looked at Zalver, his gaze heavy. What happens when they have no choice but to evolve further? Silence hung between them. Zalver's mandibles twitched. Then what do we do? For the first time since the war began, a slow, knowing smile crept across Forlac's face. We change our strategy? Zalver blinked. You mean? Forlac stood, his decision made. We stop fighting them? Zalver stiffened. General, the High Command will not accept surrender. Not surrender, Forlac corrected. Asterisk allegiance, asterisk. Zalver froze. You mean join them? Forlac nodded. Not as servants. Not as conquerors. As allies. Zalver struggled for words. But, sir, we are warriors. Proud. Disciplined. How can we align ourselves with a species that fights with tricks and chaos? Forlac's eyes glowed with something unreadable. Because I would rather stand beside them than against them. He turned back to the holoscreen, watching the humans laugh, drink, and slap each other on the back as if they hadn't just fought a war. They were unpredictable, uncontrollable, unstoppable. And if the Zarketh wanted to survive in a universe where humans existed, it was better to be on their side.